On a crisp Tuesday morning in October 1957, Sister Margaret Mary O'Brien unlocked the heavy oak doors of St. Raphael's Catholic Church in Baltimore, Maryland, expecting nothing more than another quiet day of prayer and service. The autumn sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting ruby and sapphire patterns across the worn wooden pews, while the familiar scent of incense and candle wax hung in the air like a benediction. She had no way of knowing that within the next hour her discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would expose one of the most sophisticated Soviet intelligence networks ever to operate on American soil. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. Sister Margaret Mary had been tending to St. Raphael's for nearly 15 years, ever since she took her final vows at the age of 23. Now 38, she moved through her morning duties with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed the same rituals thousands of times. The wooden donation box near the entrance required emptying every few days, a task she typically handled before the 6 o'clock morning mass. On this particular morning, the box felt unusually heavy as she lifted it from its brass mounting on the wall. She carried the box to the small office behind the sacristy, a cramped room that smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Father Timothy Brennan, the parish priest, was away visiting his ailing mother in Philadelphia, leaving Sister Margaret Mary alone to manage the church's daily operations. She sat at the worn desk, opened the box with the brass key she kept on a chain around her waist, and began sorting through the contents. Most donations came in small white envelopes with the parish's name printed on the front. Some parishioners wrote their names for tax purposes, while others preferred to give anonymously. Sister Margaret Mary had developed a system over the years, separating cash from checks, recording amounts in the ledger, and preparing the bank deposit. It was tedious work, but she found a certain meditative quality in the repetition. Halfway through the box, her fingers touched something different. Instead of the familiar texture of an envelope, she felt a piece of paper, thin and crisp, folded multiple times into a tight square no larger than a postage stamp. Curious, she carefully unfolded it, expecting perhaps a prayer request or a note from a troubled parishioner seeking guidance. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. The note was written in pencil, the handwriting small and precise, almost mechanical in its uniformity. But it was the content that caused her hands to tremble. The message read, "Package received, contents verified. Next delivery scheduled for November 3rd at 0200 hours, same location. Confirm receipt through usual channels. Destroy this immediately." Sister Margaret Mary read the note 3 times, her mind racing to make sense of what she was holding. The language was strange, clinical, nothing like the personal messages she occasionally found in the donation box. The mention of a delivery scheduled at 2 o'clock in the morning sent a chill through her. Who would be making deliveries at that hour? And why would such a note end up in a church donation box? She set the note down on the desk, as if it might burn her fingers. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as some kind of mistake, perhaps a note that had accidentally fallen from someone's pocket along with their donation. But something about the careful folding, the deliberate placement, suggested otherwise. This note had been put in the donation box intentionally. Sister Margaret Mary stood and walked to the small window that overlooked the parking lot. A light rain had begun to fall, creating patterns on the glass that reminded her of tears. Her mind worked through the possibilities. Could this be related to something criminal? The Korean War had ended 4 years earlier, but the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union dominated the news. Just last month, the Soviets had launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, sending shockwaves through American society and intensifying fears about Soviet technological superiority. She had read in the newspapers about Soviet spies operating in the United States. The trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who had been executed 4 years earlier for passing atomic secrets to the Soviets, remained fresh in the public consciousness. The FBI, under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, had been actively investigating communist infiltration throughout American institutions. Could this note be related to espionage? The thought seemed almost absurd. St. Raphael's was a modest parish in a working-class neighborhood of Baltimore. The congregation consisted mainly of factory workers, dock laborers, and their families. What possible interest could Soviet spies have in a Catholic church? But the note was real, sitting on her desk like a viper coiled to strike. Sister Margaret Mary decided she needed to speak with someone about this. With Father Brennan away, she considered calling him in Philadelphia, but she worried about discussing such a sensitive matter over the phone. Instead, she thought of Father Joseph Kelly, a Jesuit priest who taught at Loyola College and occasionally helped with confessions at St. Raphael's. Father Kelly had served as a chaplain during World War II and had connections with various government officials through his work with Catholic war veterans. If anyone could advise her on what to do with this mysterious note, it would be him. She carefully refolded the note and placed it in her pocket, then locked the rest of the donation money in the church safe. The morning Mass would begin in 30 minutes, but she felt too agitated to concentrate on the liturgy. She needed to make that phone call first. The rectory's telephone sat on a small table in the hallway, its black surface gleaming in the dim light. Sister Margaret Mary dialed Father Kelly's number at Loyola, her fingers fumbling slightly with the rotary dial. After 4 rings, a secretary answered. Father Kelly is teaching his morning class until 10 o'clock, the secretary informed her. Would you like to leave a message? Sister Margaret Mary hesitated. Tell him Sister Margaret Mary from St. Raphael's called, she said finally. It's urgent. I need to speak with him as soon as possible. The secretary assured her that Father Kelly would receive the message, and Sister Margaret Mary hung up the phone with a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:15. Mass would begin at 10. She would have to wait. The morning Mass proceeded without incident, though Sister Margaret Mary found her mind wandering during Father Anderson's sermon. Father Anderson, a young priest recently assigned to assist Father Brennan, spoke about the importance of community and helping one's neighbors, but his words seemed to float past her like autumn leaves on the wind. She kept thinking about the note in her pocket, about the implications of what it might mean. After Mass, as she was helping to tidy the sanctuary, one of the regular parishioners approached her. Mrs. Elena Volkov was a Russian immigrant who had come to America in 1938, fleeing the growing political tensions in Europe. She was a quiet woman in her mid-50s, always dressed modestly in dark colors, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She attended Mass every Sunday, and on several weekdays always sitting in the same pew near the back of the church. Sister, Mrs. Volkov said in her accented English, I wanted to thank you for the prayer intentions you offered last week. My nephew is doing much better. Sister Margaret Mary smiled warmly, though her mind was elsewhere. I'm so glad to hear that, Mrs. Volkov. We'll continue to pray for him. Mrs. Volkov nodded, her pale blue eyes studying Sister Margaret Mary with an intensity that seemed unusual. You seem troubled today, sister, she observed. Is everything well? The question caught Sister Margaret Mary off guard. Oh yes, everything's fine, she replied quickly. Just a busy morning, that's all. Mrs. Volkov's expression didn't change. If you ever need to talk, sister, I am a good listener, she said. Sometimes the weight of secrets can be very heavy. The comment struck Sister Margaret Mary as odd, but before she could respond, Mrs. Volkov had turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Sister Margaret Mary watched her go, a new uneasiness settling in her stomach. Had that been a meaningful comment, or was she simply reading too much into an innocent conversation because of the note? Father Kelly returned her call just after noon. Sister Margaret Mary took the phone in the rectory office, closing the door for privacy. Father, thank you for calling back, she began. I found something this morning that I believe you should see. I'd rather not discuss it over the telephone. Father Kelly's voice was calm and reassuring. Of course, sister. I can come to St. Raphael's this afternoon if that would be convenient. Say around 2 o'clock. That would be perfect, Father. Thank you. The wait until 2 o'clock felt interminable. Sister Margaret Mary tried to occupy herself with routine tasks, preparing the church for evening devotions, answering correspondence, updating the parish records. But her mind kept returning to the note, to Mrs. Volkov's strange comment, to the growing sense that something significant and dangerous was unfolding around her. Father Kelly arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, his black clerical suit immaculate despite the rain that had continued throughout the day. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed very little. Sister Margaret Mary led him to the rectory office and closed the door. "Father, I'm probably overreacting," she began, "but I found something this morning that troubles me greatly." She handed him the note, watching his face carefully as he read it. His expression remained neutral, but she noticed his grip on the paper tighten slightly. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked. "In the donation box this morning when I was counting the offerings," she replied. "It was folded up very small, hidden among the regular donation envelopes." Father Kelly read the note again, more slowly this time. "And you're certain it wasn't there before? No possibility it's been sitting in that box for days or weeks?" "I empty the box every 2 or 3 days," Sister Margaret Mary explained. "I would have noticed it before. Someone put it there recently, probably within the last 48 hours. Father Kelly set the note down on the desk and was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in a gesture of deep thought. Finally, he looked up at Sister Margaret Mary with an expression of grave concern. "Sister, I believe you were right to call me," he said. "This note, if authentic, suggests something very serious. The language, the timing reference, the instruction to destroy the evidence, these are consistent with covert communications used by intelligence operatives." Sister Margaret Mary felt her fears confirmed. "So you think it's related to espionage?" "I think we cannot rule out that possibility," Father Kelly replied. "The question is, who put this note in your donation box, and was it intended for someone specific, or was the drop compromised in some way?" "A drop?" Sister Margaret Mary repeated, unfamiliar with the term. "It's intelligence terminology," Father Kelly explained. "A dead drop is a method of passing information or materials between 2 parties without direct contact. One person leaves the item in a prearranged location, and the other picks it up later. It's a way of maintaining security and preventing both parties from being seen together." The implications were staggering. But why would spies use our church's donation box? "Think about it, sister," Father Kelly said. "A church is the perfect cover. People come and go at all hours. Someone putting an envelope in a donation box attracts no attention whatsoever. And if the arrangement has been working for some time, both parties would feel confident in the security of the location." Sister Margaret Mary felt slightly dizzy, but if that's true, then someone from our parish might be involved. "Someone we know." "That's very likely," Father Kelly agreed, "which is why we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. If Soviet intelligence is indeed using your church, and we tip them off that we know, they'll simply move their operation elsewhere, and we'll have lost the opportunity to identify the individuals involved." "What should we do?" Sister Margaret Mary asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation," Father Kelly said firmly. "This is beyond our capability to handle. The FBI has people trained for exactly this kind of situation." Sister Margaret Mary nodded, though the thought of involving the FBI frightened her. She had heard stories about the Bureau's aggressive tactics, about interrogations and surveillance. But she also understood that if Soviet spies were operating through her church, the threat to national security was real and serious. Father Kelly made the phone call from the rectory office while Sister Margaret Mary sat in anxious silence. He asked to speak with the agent in charge of counterintelligence operations and was transferred twice before reaching the right person. The conversation was brief, consisting mostly of Father Kelly listening and responding with short, affirmative answers. "They're sending 2 agents," he reported after hanging up. "They should be here within the hour. They want us to touch the note as little as possible, in case there are fingerprints they can analyze." The wait for the FBI agents was tense. Sister Margaret Mary made coffee, more to have something to do than out of any real desire for refreshment. Father Kelly sat quietly, his breviary open on his lap, though she noticed he wasn't actually reading it. Special Agents Robert Morrison and Edward Chen arrived at 3:30. Morrison was a heavy-set man in his 40s with thinning brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Chen was younger, perhaps 30, with an athletic build and observant eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the rectory office. Both wore dark suits and carried leather briefcases. Father Kelly, Sister, Agent Morrison began after introductions were made. "Thank you for contacting us. I understand you found a suspicious note this morning." Sister Margaret Mary recounted the entire story, from opening the donation box to unfolding the note to her decision to call Father Kelly. Agent Chen took notes in a small leather notebook, while Agent Morrison listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "May we see the note?" Morrison requested. Father Kelly handed over the folded paper, which Morrison examined carefully without touching it directly. He used a pair of tweezers from his briefcase to hold it up to the light, studying the handwriting and the quality of the paper. "This is a serious matter," Morrison said finally. "The language and format are consistent with communications we've intercepted from Soviet intelligence networks. The timing reference, 200 hours, suggests military or intelligence training, and the instruction to destroy the message immediately indicates operational security consciousness." Sister Margaret Mary felt a wave of vindication mixed with fear. She had been right to worry, but being right meant that the danger was real. "We need to ask you some questions about your parish," Agent Chen said, his pen poised over his notebook. "How many regular parishioners do you have? Are there any recent additions to the congregation? Anyone who stands out as unusual or who has shown particular interest in the donation box?" The questions continued for nearly an hour. Sister Margaret Mary described the parish's demographics, the regular mass schedule, the various groups and activities that met at the church. She mentioned Mrs. Volkov, the Russian immigrant, and her strange comment that morning about the weight of secrets. Both agents immediately became more interested. "Tell us everything you know about this Mrs. Volkov," Morrison instructed. Sister Margaret Mary realized how little she actually knew. Elena Volkov had been attending St. Raphael's for about 7 years, ever since she moved to the neighborhood. She was a widow, her husband having died in a factory accident. She lived alone in a small apartment on Eastern Avenue. She worked as a seamstress at a tailor shop downtown. She rarely socialized with other parishioners, though she was always polite and respectful. She had no known family in the United States, except for the nephew she had mentioned that morning. "Does she have access to the church outside of Mass times?" Agent Chen asked. Sister Margaret Mary considered this. Like many of the regular parishioners, Mrs. Volkov sometimes came to the church during the day to pray in the quiet sanctuary. The church was rarely locked during daylight hours, a practice Father Brennan maintained despite concerns about theft. Anyone could enter and exit freely. "Has she ever shown particular interest in the donation box?" Morrison pressed. "Not that I've noticed," Sister Margaret Mary admitted. "But I'm not always in the sanctuary. There are times when the church is empty." Agent Morrison exchanged a meaningful glance with Agent Chen. "We'll need to investigate Mrs. Volkov's background," Morrison said. "In the meantime, it's crucial that you continue your normal routines. Don't let anyone know about this discovery or our involvement. If this is indeed a dead drop operation, the person who left this note will be expecting confirmation that it was received. When they don't get that confirmation, they may try to make contact in other ways." "What about the next delivery?" Father Kelly asked. "The note mentions November 3rd at 2 in the morning. That's less than 3 weeks away." Morrison nodded grimly. "We'll have surveillance in place before then. If someone shows up for this delivery, we'll be watching. But we need to be very careful. These operations usually involve multiple people, and we want to identify the entire network, not just one courier." The agents prepared to leave, taking the note with them as evidence. Morrison handed Sister Margaret Mary a business card with a phone number written on the back. "If you notice anything unusual, anything at all, call this number immediately," he instructed. "Someone will be available 24 hours a day. And remember, tell no one about this conversation or our investigation. Not Father Brennan when he returns, not your fellow sisters, absolutely no one. The security of this operation depends on complete discretion." After the agents left, Sister Margaret Mary and Father Kelly sat in stunned silence. The afternoon had transformed from a routine day into something out of a spy novel. Sister Margaret Mary felt the weight of the secret pressing down on her shoulders. She was now part of a counterintelligence operation, her church unwittingly hosting a Soviet spy network. Over the following days, Sister Margaret Mary tried to maintain her normal routine, but she found herself observing the parishioners with new suspicion. Was that man in the third pew looking at the donation box too intently? Was that woman who lingered after Mass really praying, or was she waiting for an opportunity to check for a message? The paranoia was exhausting, and she found herself praying for guidance and strength. She noticed that Mrs. Volkov seemed more anxious than usual. During Mass on Thursday, the Russian woman's hands trembled as she accepted communion, and Sister Margaret Mary thought she saw fear in those pale blue eyes. After Mass, Mrs. Volkov hurried out without her usual brief greeting, her head down as if trying to avoid notice. On Friday evening, Sister Margaret Mary was preparing to lock the church for the night when she heard footsteps in the sanctuary. She emerged from the sacristy to find Mrs. Volkov standing near the donation box, her hand reaching toward it before pulling back, as if uncertain. "Mrs. Volkov," Sister Margaret Mary said gently, trying to keep her voice calm. "Can I help you with something?" The Russian woman turned sharply, her face pale in the dim light of the votive candles. "Sister, I was just going to make a donation," she stammered, fumbling in her purse. "Of course," Sister Margaret Mary replied, her heart pounding. "The Sunday collection is the day after tomorrow, but you're always welcome to contribute whenever you like." Mrs. Volkov's hands were shaking so badly that she dropped her purse, its contents spilling across the floor. Sister Margaret Mary moved to help her gather the scattered items: lipstick, a compact mirror, a small wallet, a photograph of a young man in a Soviet military uniform. Their eyes met over that photograph, and in that moment, Sister Margaret Mary saw the truth written in Mrs. Volkov's expression: terror, resignation, and a desperate plea for understanding. "My nephew," Mrs. Volkov said quietly, her voice breaking. "He is not really my nephew, he is my son. They told me he would be safe if I did what they asked. They promised me he would be allowed to leave the Soviet Union and join me here in America. But he is still there, still a prisoner, and I am still doing their terrible work." Sister Margaret Mary sat back on her heels, the photograph trembling in her hand. The pieces were falling into place. Mrs. Volkov wasn't a spy out of ideology or greed. She was a mother being coerced through threats against her child. "Eleanor," Sister Margaret Mary said softly, using the woman's first name for the first time. "Tell me what happened." Mrs. Volkov began to cry, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I thought when I left the Soviet Union in 1938 that I was escaping forever," she whispered. "But they never let you go. Never. When my son was 18, they conscripted him into the army. I had not seen him in 20 years. Then 5 years ago, a man came to my apartment here in Baltimore. He knew everything about me, about my son. He showed me photographs of Alexei in uniform in what looked like a labor camp. The man said that if I cooperated, if I did small tasks for them, Alexei would be treated well and eventually released. If I refused, Alexei would disappear into the Gulag system, and I would never hear from him again." "What kind of tasks?" Sister Margaret Mary asked, though she already knew the answer. "At first, just information," Mrs. Volkov explained. "They wanted to know about the naval shipyard where my husband worked before he died. Then they had me befriend people, certain people, and report on their activities. And then, about 2 years ago, they began using the church. They needed a secure location to pass messages and materials. I suggested the donation box. I told them I attended St. Raphael's regularly, that I could monitor the box without suspicion." "So you've been checking the box for messages," Sister Margaret Mary said, understanding now why Mrs. Volkov had been so nervous on Friday evening. "Not just checking," Mrs. Volkov admitted. "Sometimes I leave messages, sometimes I retrieve them. There is another person, someone else in the parish who leaves and picks up the materials. We are never supposed to know each other's identities, but I think I know who it is." "Who?" Sister Margaret Mary asked urgently. Mrs. Volkov shook her head. "If I tell you, if I expose the network, they will kill my son. You must understand, sister, I'm not doing this because I believe in communism or because I hate America. I'm doing this because they have my son. He is all I have left in this world." Sister Margaret Mary took both of Mrs. Volkov's hands in hers. "Elena, listen to me carefully," she said firmly. "You need to trust me now. The note that was supposed to be in the donation box, I found it. I gave it to the FBI. They know about the operation." Mrs. Volkov's face drained of what little color remained. "Oh, God," she breathed. "Oh, God, they will kill him. When the network realizes it's compromised, when the messages stop flowing, they will assume I betrayed them. They will kill Alexei. Not if you help us, Sister Margaret Mary said. The FBI can protect you. They can work with authorities to try to locate your son and bring him to safety. But you have to cooperate fully. You have to tell them everything. Mrs. Volkov looked at the photograph in Sister Margaret Mary's hand, at the young man in the Soviet uniform who looked so much like his mother. The hope and despair warring on her face was heartbreaking to witness. If there is even a chance, she whispered, even the smallest chance that Alexei could be saved. There is, Sister Margaret Mary assured her, praying that she was telling the truth. But we need to call the FBI right now. Sister Margaret Mary retrieved Agent Morrison's card from the rectory office and made the call from the telephone in the hallway. Morrison answered on the second ring, and his tone shifted to sharp alertness when she explained that Elena Volkov was with her and ready to talk. Don't let her leave, Morrison instructed. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Agent Morrison and Agent Chen arrived even faster than promised, accompanied by 2 additional agents. Sister Margaret Mary didn't recognize. They set up in the rectory's small conference room, and for the next 4 hours, Elena Volkov told her story in exhaustive detail. She had been recruited by the Soviet intelligence service, known as the KGB, through their coercion program, which targeted Soviet expatriates living in the West by threatening family members still in the Soviet Union. Her handler, a man who called himself Peter Sokolov, but was certainly using an alias, met with her once every 3 months in various locations around Baltimore. He provided her with instructions, collected the intelligence she gathered, and showed her carefully staged photographs of her son to prove he was still alive. The operation running through St. Raphael's involved at least 3 people that Mrs. Volkov knew of: herself, the person who left materials in the dead drop, and presumably someone who collected them. The materials varied, sometimes microfilm hidden in hollowed-out coins, sometimes written notes like the one Sister Margaret Mary had found, occasionally small packages she didn't dare open. "Do you know what information is being passed?" Agent Chen asked. Mrs. Volkov shook her head. "They keep us separated, tell us nothing. But I know it must be important. The man I believe is the other person using the drop. He works somewhere with access to military information. I have seen him wearing an identification badge from the Aberdeen Proving Ground." The agent's interest sharpened immediately. Aberdeen Proving Ground was a major United States Army installation in Maryland, focused on testing and developing military equipment and weapons. If Soviet intelligence had managed to place an asset there, the security breach was extremely serious. "Can you identify this person?" Morrison asked. Mrs. Volkov hesitated. "I have only suspicions, not certainty," she said. "But there is a man, Thomas Hartley, who has attended Mass at St. Raphael's for about the same amount of time I have been running the drop. He is always alone, he never socializes, and I have noticed him watching the donation box when he thinks no one is observing him. We'll need you to point him out to us," Agent Chen said. "Can you attend Mass this Sunday?" Mrs. Volkov nodded, though fear still shadowed her eyes. "But what about my son? What happens to Alexei now?" Agent Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Volkov, I cannot make you promises about what will happen to your son. The Soviet Union is a closed society, and our options for mounting rescue operations are extremely limited. However, if you cooperate fully with our investigation, I give you my word that we will do everything in our power to locate Alexei and work through diplomatic channels to secure his release or defection." It was the best assurance anyone could offer, and they all knew it. Mrs. Volkov accepted it with the quiet resignation of someone who had run out of alternatives. The FBI established surveillance around St. Raphael's Church immediately. Undercover agents, disguised as parishioners or neighbors going about their daily business, monitored everyone who entered or left the building. Sister Margaret Mary continued her routine, though knowing she was being watched by both FBI agents and potentially Soviet operatives made her increasingly nervous. On Sunday morning, Mrs. Volkov attended the 10 o'clock Mass as usual. Sister Margaret Mary watched from her position near the altar as the Russian woman's eyes tracked a man sitting 4 rows back on the opposite side of the aisle. He was in his early 40s, with sandy brown hair and an unremarkable appearance. Sister Margaret Mary recognized him as someone she had seen at Mass before, but had never really noticed. He seemed to fit perfectly into the congregation, neither too conspicuous nor too invisible. During the sign of peace, when parishioners traditionally shook hands with those around them, Sister Margaret Mary observed Thomas Hartley's careful avoidance of the people near him. He nodded politely, but didn't make physical contact, and she wondered if this was operational security training. Avoid interactions that might make him memorable to others. After Mass, Agent Morrison and Agent Chen, dressed in casual Sunday clothes and seated in the back of the church, followed Hartley at a discreet distance. Over the next week, they compiled a detailed profile of his movements, his residence, his employment at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and his suspicious lack of any real social connections or personal history prior to 7 years ago. The breakthrough came when FBI technicians managed to place a listening device in Hartley's apartment. On the evening of October 29th, they recorded him making a phone call to a number that was traced to a residence in Washington, D.C. The conversation was brief and coded, but the mention of the package for early November aligned perfectly with the note Sister Margaret Mary had found. FBI surveillance teams identified the person at the Washington number as Viktor Petrov, a cultural attaché at the Soviet embassy. Petrov had diplomatic immunity, which meant he couldn't be arrested or prosecuted, but his involvement confirmed that Hartley was indeed part of a Soviet intelligence network. On the evening of November 2nd, one day before the scheduled delivery mentioned in the original note, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover authorized the arrest of Thomas Hartley. Agents moved in as he returned home from work, finding in his apartment a treasure trove of espionage materials, a miniature camera for photographing documents, invisible ink supplies, coded message pads, and most damning classified documents from Aberdeen Proving Ground detailing new artillery shell designs and chemical weapons research. The arrest sent shockwaves through the intelligence community and eventually made headlines across the nation. Thomas Hartley, whose real name was revealed to be Dmitry Sokolov, brother of Mrs. Volkov's handler, Peter, had successfully infiltrated Aberdeen Proving Ground 7 years earlier, using a carefully constructed false identity. The documents he had photographed and passed to Soviet intelligence represented some of America's most sensitive military secrets. The trial was held in early 1958, with Sister Margaret Mary and Mrs. Volkov both testifying about the donation box operation. The prosecution painted a picture of a methodical, long-term espionage effort that had compromised national security at the height of Cold War tensions. Dmitry Sokolov was convicted on multiple counts of espionage and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. The story of the nun who uncovered a Soviet spy ring through a misplaced note in a donation box captured the public imagination. Newspapers ran headlines like "Sisters Discovery Breaks Spy Network" and "Divine Intervention Nun Foils Soviet Plot." Sister Margaret Mary found the attention deeply uncomfortable and refused most interview requests, preferring to return to her quiet work at St. Raphael's. The most difficult aspect of the entire ordeal for Sister Margaret Mary was what happened to Elena Volkov. Despite the FBI's efforts and diplomatic pressure, the Soviet government denied that Alexei Volkov existed or that any coercion program had been used to recruit his mother. Mrs. Volkov entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, given a new identity, and relocated to a different part of the country. Before she left Baltimore, she visited St. Raphael's one final time. "Sister, Mrs. Volkov said as they stood together in the empty sanctuary, "I know I did terrible things. I betrayed my adopted country because I was weak, because I let them use my love for my son against me. I don't expect forgiveness." Sister Margaret Mary took the other woman's hands. "Elena, you were in an impossible situation. You made choices out of love and fear, not hatred or greed. God sees the heart, and He understands suffering better than anyone. You have my forgiveness, and I believe you have His as well." Mrs. Volkov wept then, the tears of someone who had carried an unbearable burden for too long. When she finally composed herself, she pressed something into Sister Margaret Mary's palm. The photograph of her son in his Soviet military uniform. "Keep this," she requested. "Pray for him. Even if I never see him again, even if he never knows what I did or what I tried to do, Maybe your prayers will reach him somehow. Sister Margaret Mary promised, and she kept that promise. For years afterward, she prayed daily for a young Soviet soldier named Alexei Volkov, hoping that somehow, somewhere, her prayers might bring him peace and safety. The donation box at St. Raphael's was replaced with a new one, this time securely locked and checked multiple times per day. The FBI conducted security reviews of Catholic churches throughout Baltimore and other major cities, looking for signs that other parishes might have been similarly compromised. Several additional cases were discovered and quietly resolved, though none had the dramatic flair of the St. Raphael's incident. Father Timothy Brennan returned from Philadelphia 2 days after Hartley's arrest, shocked to learn what had transpired in his absence. He struggled with the knowledge that his church had been used for espionage, feeling that the sacred space had been violated. Sister Margaret Mary helped him understand that the church itself remained holy, that the actions of a few individuals could not corrupt the fundamental goodness of the community of faith that gathered there. The broader implications of the case extended beyond the immediate arrests. The discovery that Soviet intelligence had successfully placed a long-term agent inside Aberdeen Proving Ground led to a complete overhaul of the facility's security protocols. Background checks were intensified, access to classified materials was restricted, and counterintelligence training became mandatory for all personnel with security clearances. At the FBI, the case became a training example of how Soviet intelligence operations worked and how seemingly innocent locations like churches, libraries, or parks could be exploited as dead drops. The accidental discovery by Sister Margaret Mary was analyzed for the lessons it provided about the importance of citizens remaining vigilant and reporting suspicious activities to authorities. For Sister Margaret Mary herself, life gradually returned to normal, though she was forever changed by the experience. She had glimpsed a world of shadows and deception that existed parallel to the everyday life she knew. She understood now, in a way she never had before, that the Cold War was not just an abstract conflict between distant superpowers, but a real and present danger that could touch anyone, anywhere, even a nun, quietly serving her parish in Baltimore. The note she had found that October morning, that tiny folded square of paper with its cryptic message, had been the thread that, when pulled, unraveled an entire network of espionage. In retrospect, she marveled at how close the operation had come to going completely undetected. If the note had been placed more carefully, if she had dismissed it as unimportant, if Mrs. Volkov had successfully retrieved it before Sister Margaret Mary emptied the donation box, the spy ring might have continued operating for years. Sometimes, sitting in the quiet sanctuary after evening mass, Sister Margaret Mary would think about the strange intersections of fate, faith, and chance that had brought all these events together. She believed, as she had always believed, that God worked in mysterious ways, that even in the darkest corners of human activity, divine providence could shine through. The Cold War would continue for more than 3 decades after the St. Raphael's case, with countless other operations, betrayals, and close calls. The arms race would escalate, proxy wars would be fought in distant countries, and the threat of nuclear annihilation would hover over the world like a sword suspended by the thinnest of threads. But in one small Baltimore church, a nun's routine morning task had briefly pulled back the curtain on that hidden war, revealing the human costs and the moral complexities that lay beneath the headlines. Years later, in 1991, when the Soviet Union finally collapsed and the Cold War came to its long-awaited end, Sister Margaret Mary, now in her 70s and serving at a different parish, watched the news coverage of the Berlin Wall's demolition and the various Soviet republics declaring independence. She thought of Elena Volkov, somewhere under a new name, and wondered if the woman had survived to see this day. She thought of Alexei Volkov, who would be in his 50s if he was still alive, and prayed that he had somehow found freedom. Most of all, she thought about that October morning in 1957, about the donation box and the note that had changed everything. In the grand sweep of history, it was a small incident, a footnote in the vast chronicle of Cold War espionage. But for those directly involved, for Sister Margaret Mary and Elena Volkov and the countless others whose lives were touched by that discovery, it had been everything. The church, St. Raphael's, still stands in Baltimore today, Though much has changed, the neighborhood has evolved, the congregation has diversified, and many of the people who knew about the spy case have passed away or moved on. But in the parish archives, carefully preserved, is a file containing newspaper clippings, FBI commendations, and a letter from President Dwight Eisenhower thanking Sister Margaret Mary for her service to the nation. And in the sanctuary, if you know where to look, there is a small brass plaque mounted on the wall near where the donation box once hung. It reads simply, "In memory of all those who served in hidden ways during times of trial." Most parishioners walk past it without a second thought, assuming it's a generic memorial to veterans or missionaries. But those who know the story understand its deeper meaning, a tribute to the unlikely heroes of the Cold War, the ordinary people who, through courage or conscience or simple chance, played their small part in the great struggle of their time. Sister Margaret Mary O'Brien passed away in 2003 at the age of 84. Having served the church faithfully for 6 decades, her obituary in the Baltimore Sun mentioned her role in uncovering the Soviet spy ring, but it was presented as just one accomplishment among many in a life dedicated to service and compassion. Those who attended her funeral remembered her not as a spy catcher, but as a gentle, devout woman who had touched countless lives through her ministry. But among the mourners was a woman in her late 70s who had traveled from the West Coast to pay her respects. She stood at the back of the church during the funeral mass, her face partially obscured by dark glasses and a scarf. After the service, she approached Sister Margaret Mary's casket, placed a single white rose among the flowers, and whispered a prayer in Russian. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could ask her name. Some who witnessed this believed it was Elena Volkov, come to honor the woman who had shown her compassion in her darkest hour. Others thought it was just a former parishioner paying respects. The truth, like so many truths from that era of secrets and shadows, remains a mystery. What is certain is that a simple act of routine service, a nun emptying a donation box on an October morning, had rippled out in ways no one could have anticipated, affecting lives, altering the course of intelligence operations, and reminding everyone involved that in the hidden war between nations, the most important battles are often fought in the most unlikely places, by the most unexpected people. The story serves as a reminder that during the Cold War, the front lines were everywhere and nowhere. That ordinary citizens found themselves thrust into extraordinary circumstances, and that sometimes the difference between security and catastrophe hung on the thinnest of threads. A misplaced note, a moment of courage, a decision to speak up, when everything would have been easier if one had simply stayed silent. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories, and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time.